Hello, everyone, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the Better the Pond Pondcast, the Flying V edition, where we talk to incredible people who are creating impact and ripples on the pond. My name is Warren Berry, and I'm your host and the founder of Instinctive Solutions, where we believe that everyone is an odd duck, but that's what makes them awesome. Now, today, my guest is Sue Rice. All the way from across the pond in Paris, France, Sue is the author of Tiny Thunder, Irresistible Messaging for an Overwhelmed World, known as the female David Ogilvy, and the master of what we deemed as word spaghetti. Sue in third grade did a spice board as a school project, and from that moment on, she just knew that she would travel the world to see where those spices came from. She has followed her intuition since, and it has led her down some incredible paths and so many lessons along the way. In a time where people are so distracted and you need them to listen, sometimes you just have to whisper. Words are Sue's magic carpet. Thank you, Sue, for being your authentic self. This alone is your gift and how you better the pond. Ladies and gentlemen, Sue Rice. All right, Sue Rice, all the way from sunny Paris, France. The author of Tiny Thunder, Irresistible Messages for an Overwhelmed World, and otherwise known as the female David Ogilvy. Welcome to the Better the Pond Pondcast. It is absolutely great to have you from across the pond.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we had talked before, and we would had all sorts of fun. And I know we had to, should we do our plug to Kevin?
Yes, please.
Give Kevin the plug.
So Kevin Thompson was the one who introduced us, and he is like the best connector of human beings, which is kind of a great thing because that's, I think, kind of the theme of what my book is about, real relationships and about what you do as well, right? It's all about connections.
Absolutely. So Kevin Thompson, there's your plug. We'll make sure we get that in the show notes. Give him a big shout out. All right. So before I get into the questions a little bit, Sue, just can I give me an overall view and my listeners an overall idea of what is it that you do?
Okay, so I think my area of specialty is kind of lies at the intersection between writing and communication and strategy. I'm all about, bringing those two things together and trying to present products and ideas and people in a different light, and thinking about things a little bit less. I'm sort of anti-template, I guess is the way to describe it. Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people really crave that. They're interested in stories, and not just brand stories, but they're interested in stories about life that they can glean different insights from, either for their business or for their own personal edification.
It's interesting you bring that up, and it just goes on to a conversation I had last night. A friend of mine, Gary Maxwell, he's in the branding and marketing world, and he made an interesting comment last night. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. And he said that basically, there was a time when he could go into a room, do speaking, and just tell a story, and the story was enough to captivate, the audience, and they would engage in this. And he said, but what's been really interesting this last little while, what he's noticed that it's not enough anymore, and that people are becoming a little more cynical, a little more, they're questioning everything now. Where a story before you could hear a story and grab onto it, but now he says that they're actually questioning everything. And it was an interesting point. And I sort of looked at it from the perspective of since COVID, and there was with media and politics and everything, all the crazy that went on with it. But I said, I wonder if because through that time, if people were now have just sort of got to the point of questioning everything, like they don't really know what's grounded, and is a story enough? So what's your thoughts on that, Sue?
I think it really depends on the story, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I think if people sort of smell that the story is self-serving, the storyteller is using that story to self-serve, I think that's when people's question marks come up, right?
Mm.
But when you share stories, when you think about it, just, sort of off business, not when you're presenting, but when you're like sitting at a dinner table with friends, or you're out at a cafe with someone, that's what we do. We tell stories. I mean, did you know it's something like 70% of what we talk about are gossip, which are stories about other people, right? And I don't see anyone questioning those. Right. And I think that, but I think one of the things that I think we've kind of, what has happened, and this is of course my opinion, I don't have necessarily a lot of scientific data to back this up, but I think what we've done is a lot of what we're doing in the sort of marketing and online world is we're transferring, sort of 20th century marketing formulas into the 21st century, into the social media platforms, etc. And what is beautiful about the social media platforms, there's a lot of negative things, but what is beautiful about it is actually it has leveled the playing field, and it has allowed us to talk to each other as human beings. It's not company to human, it's human to human. And I think a lot of people are afraid to do that. Why not replicate that dinner conversation? That one which you and I are masters at it, right? Where we're jumping from topic to topic, we're telling little anecdotes, we're inspiring each other from what we've heard. And that's what I mean when I talk about storytelling, is sort of joining that collective conversation that can sometimes be messy, but where we're sharing things that are going on in the world, and then maybe linking it into what we're doing. But starting off with that, because that's how we connect with each other sort of off the business campus.
Mm.
And why not replicate that when we're sharing what it is that we do and how we can help someone in a business sort of setting. And I mean, a lot of people would say that that's not serious, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's as serious as a heart attack, right? Because that is how our brains are wired. There's a reason why all we do all the time is tell stories to each other. We're hardwired to do
Right.
that.
And so I'm going to get into that later on, and we're going to dive into what you're doing to better the pond. So I want to get in a little bit into your book and
Okay.
all that whole piece. We'll get there. So as I told you earlier, I said I'm going to be a good steward of time today, because you and I can easily get into trouble. So all right, Sue, here we go. What got you from being a gosling, and I mean like when you were hatched, your very earliest beginnings, what got you from being a gosling to leaving the nest when you actually have up and went out on your own to where you are today? Sue Rice, what is your backstory?
So I grew up in California, which is now the part of California which is now known as Silicon Valley.
So where exactly were you hatched?
I was actually hatched in Los Angeles, in Glendale, California. Very, very and then the Gosling family spent about 5 years in Montecito, which is now very famous because of Prince Harry and his wife. Mm-hmm. And then about when I was 6 years old, we moved up to a town called Atherton, California, which is about 30 miles south of San Francisco. So that's where I grew up. Oh. And I grew up in a very interesting time. I feel like I always remember there was this, I've actually never told this story, but when I was like in third grade, we had this project where we made a spice board, okay? All the different spices of the world. And I remember that like it was yesterday. And I think I always had wanderlust. And I was stared at those spices from wherever they were, Indonesia, whatever. And I'm like, I want to go all those places. I want to I want to fly to those places. I want to be in those places. And that, you know, from the get-go, I was all about basically not seeing the world as much as experiencing it. Right. So like, I know a lot of people like to travel to a place for a week. I like to live in place. I mean, the great thing about living here is I feel like I'm traveling every day, because I'm like, there's experience that surprises me every single day while I'm living in France, because it's not my native home, right?
Right.
And but there's a depth to it because I've been here so long, and I've lived in a lot of other countries too. But so I think my story was always about being very independent and experiencing and sort of touching the world in as deep of way as possible. And one of the way, and so that's part of the story, but the other part of the story was that my thing has always been words. I was always, that was my, that's my magic carpet, are words and books and writing. When I was really young, they brought my parents in because they had, I think it might have been the IQ, the IQ test or something. And they're like, we've never seen anyone score that high. That was my gift. That was when I was born with. My gift was words. And that's been my platform.
So, what did your parents do?
So my mother was a housewife, and my father was a small businessman. So he was an entrepreneur. He did a variety of different things. He owned companies. He invested in real estate. So there was also that sort of, I guess that's the third thread, right? So you had the sort of independent wanderlust, you had the writing, and then the third thread was this entrepreneurial, very strong entrepreneurial sense. From, when I started, so, I came to Paris. I was sent here to run BBDO Europe. There were 4 of us. There was a 4-person team. And we were in charge of like $3 billion in 25 countries. And sort of a long story short, but they ended up moving BBDO Europe from Paris to London because the guy who was running it died, actually, like suddenly. And I didn't hesitate for 1 second when that happened. I decided I would start my own thing. And I'll tell you, that was in the late 90s. And the entrepreneur, everyone's an entrepreneur nowadays, but back then you could hear echoes in that room. There were not a whole lot of people. So it was very empty. I mean, I wrote a book on a fax machine. I can still remember that noise. That noise. I wrote a book for Ericsson, the Swedish company, and I could still hear the noise of the paper coming through the fax machine.
Remember when?
So yeah, but it was always, to me, again, everyone has different choices in life, but for me, the only way I can really be master of my destiny is to be an entrepreneur. And I would rather be a master of my destiny with sort of the ups and downs that come with it. So if anyone tells you that they don't come with it, then they're lying. But I'd much rather have that, because at least I'm in charge of it, of what happens. And there's this constant, the creative, to me, being an entrepreneur is like being an artist. It really is. It's about creating. I actually think I sometimes like the creating part better than the arriving part. Everyone else talks about the arriving part and the money and all that. I'm much more into, I like the projects. I like the creativity. I love the ideas. And I have 1,000 ideas that probably will never, ever be brought to fruition. But man, they get me up in the morning.
That's what I said. You and I can be dangerous. I tell you, if I might be able to trump your thousands of ideas that may never hit.
Okay, well, we got a competition now.
So I want to bring you back a little bit. So we talked about mom and dad. Did you have any siblings?
Yes, a big family. My mother was an only child, and she made up for lost time. There were 5 of us.
Ah,
And if you met us, you would, there are 5. I mean, it's actually really a credit to my parents. Totally, totally different. Like so different. Like you would never imagine that we come from the same family.
and so did everybody went into completely different directions professionally and
Completely. Well, my sisters, except with the exception of one, were housewives. They didn't, they kind of followed my mom's sort of the way she had lived. By the way, there's nothing wrong with that.
Mhm.
But that, and they, you know, they had lots of kids, and one of them became a Mormon. Another one, she lived in Silicon Valley for ages, and then she now lives in Chico. And then my brother's actually, he moved to Missoula, Montana. He went to Reed, which is the same university that Steve Jobs went to.
Mhm.
A very liberal arts, I don't know if you know it, it's in Portland, Oregon. And then he moved to Missoula, Montana, and has been there his entire life. And he has a jazz show on NPR, and he apparently, everyone in Montana is like in love with him. But he's, you know, so, but everyone has their own thing. Everyone's very individual. Yeah, so I think it's actually kind of cool that my parents were able to do that, and then I was off doing my thing.
So now let's go back to you here. So you're growing up, there you are, you're out in the LA area. So you're in sunny California, and you're growing up, so you went to school, got into high school. What was your first job, Sue?
You're gonna love this one. What a great question. My first job, well, first I sold, well, actually it's not really true, but my first job was selling bras at Macy's. But my second first job was writing elephants at Marine World Africa, USA. Now there's a good one. I bet you have never had anyone you've interviewed that has done that.
There has been, I mean, I had one guy who worked for Disney, which is probably the closest, but I have no one who's ridden elephants. Wow.
Selling lingerie at Macy's and then writing elephants at Marine World. You know, of course I was going to become a writer, a strategist living in France. That was obvious.
Can't you see it all completely unfolding?
It was like a direct line. That's funny.
That's actually pretty funny. So,
well, you know, it's funny. I think actually that if I could just say something about that, you know, everyone plans everything out now, right? Mm-hmm. That wasn't how I still am to some extent this way. I mean, I'm kind of military about my day, and I'm very organized, but I feel like I don't know, I've kind of my journey of life has been led by my intuition. Mm-hmm. And so there was an openness and a freedom about it. So and if you do, what's interesting about that, if you lead your life that way, you end up constantly coming back to your unique magic, whatever it is. Like, so for example, my daughter, who is a really incredibly talented photographer, but she has this unique brand of magic of organizing, which sounds really crazy, but she can come into a completely chaotic room, and within 2 hours it's brilliant and calm, and that's a gift. Mm-hmm. And she loves doing that, right? So I feel like when you lead by your intuition, you end up going into the area that you are best at and where you are happiest at. When I'm writing, I am so happy. I can't explain it. I know it, like most people find it like it's like pulling out teeth, but for me, it's like this. I get in my zone. and I love it.
Well,
So
being that you
yeah,
said though that you mean words are your magic carpet.
yeah, they are my magic carpet.
So
They are my magic carpet, and I don't know where they come from. It's like, um, I'm not a very religious person, but there's definitely a higher force there because they just come out so easily. It's like literally like breathing air, drinking water. It's so easy for me.
can I borrow some of that? Would you
Yeah.
send me some,
We
please?
could talk about that.
Okay, we'll
I
talk
can
about that.
help you with that. Because most people, it's a real struggle.
Mhm.
So that's my gift. I can help people with that, right?
Right, absolutely. And that's just our, and the thing is, as you said, you live by your intuition. So, what I hear from that is you're coming from your authentic self. It's
Yeah, but sometimes you have to battle for that because and you have to jealously guard that because like a lot of people, they see the lifestyle I have and they're all like, aren't I lucky and everything? But for example, when BBDO Europe was shifted, I could have easily left, gone back, but I knew this is where I felt fulfilled and where I felt, given all those things that we talked about, the entrepreneurship, the wanderlust, and the word, this was a good place for me to be. So I stayed here. I figured out a way for that to happen, right? And I think that it's really easy for us to get other people's voices in our head and what people think. I think one of the biggest challenges in life is to listen to your intuition, not what other people say, and yet remain sensitive and compassionate to other human beings. That's a big challenge.
mm-hmm.
So you don't want to be so sensitive that you care what every word they say, but you still want to be open to their experience as well. That's sometimes a tough thing.
I would agree with you, and I think that that's something that I teach. And but if you look over time as kids, when we're younger, we trust our intuition so much more because we don't
Yes.
get in our own way. And as we age and we start listening to others and what other people want, what other people do, and what other people say, and that all gets kind of
Yeah.
messy in there, and then we stop. I think over time we really stop listening to ourselves, and we start questioning, and then we start second guessing, and that's when I think we get
Yeah,
into
I think
trouble.
so.
And
The other people's expectations, other people, I had a housekeeper that worked here, lovely woman. And at one point she said to me, "You're like a child. You have the same child, about the animals, about laughter, and that was like one of the biggest compliments anyone's ever given me.
mhm.
I think she kind of thought it was slightly an insult, but I thought it was like such a nice thing because that, you know, keeping in touch with that childlike wonder and the childlike laughter and being surprised about things that come
Mhm.
into your life, isn't that's like a really beautiful thing, I think.
I would agree, and there's a big difference between childish and childlike.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to move this into the time, Sue, that you had to leave the nest. Like you were at home in the nest, everything was comfortable. You were selling lingerie, you were riding elephants, and eventually come the time that you're gonna go. Okay, I gotta go. I gotta get on my own.
So I graduated from Stanford University. And when I graduated, I actually got into a law school in San Francisco called Hastings, right? And I decided to defer a year before I went to law school. So my that year, right after I graduated from Stanford, I moved 30 miles up north to San Francisco and worked in a law firm, which basically cured me of ever wanting to go to law school.
That worked.
That worked. There, check that one off the list. Um, and then the wanderlust just kicked in. I was in San Francisco for a year, and then I went to I spent a couple of years in Washington, DC, when I decided to do a master's in, this is sort of, it gets bigger and bigger. So I decided to do a master's in international affairs, international economics, and I went into a program with Johns Hopkins University for my master's, and I was specializing in West European economics, and I spent 3 of my semesters in Bologna, Italy. So that was sort of the beginning of the end in terms of me. And so when I was at Stanford, I had spent almost 9 months in England. It was just, it was sort of like as the years unfolded, I was spending more and more time in Europe. So then I came back and started after I got my master's, I came to New York City and started my career in advertising. My first job was with Ogilvy and Mather on Madison Avenue. And then I got a job in the international department. Oh, the international was always the thread, right? And I got a job as a strategic department, the strategic section of the international department of BBDO worldwide. And that's when I got transferred over to Paris, and the rest sort of is history.
And did you fall in love with Paris?
I fell in love with Paris. I think, everyone falls in love. There's something about Paris that a lot of people fall in love with, right? But I think what I fell in love with most is France. And I think that one of the things that people don't appreciate who haven't spent a lot of time here is that the beauty of France and its relationship with the countryside. The vineyards, the crops, it's very much the countryside. Even you can even see it in Paris too. But Paris isn't the only thing in France, I guess is what all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, when I was there visiting my daughter, we went to Paris for a few days, and it was interesting because you see the Eiffel Tower, and you see the Louvre, and all the typical things you would see in Paris. But even for myself, when we drove around, I enjoyed the countryside. I enjoyed being out and the rolling hills, and of course the vineyards, and there's something to it. It's just very, very homey. There was a different vibe out in the countryside than there is in Paris. It's a totally different feel. I told a
story yesterday on Facebook. I have to share this story. It's so sweet. So yesterday I went to the butcher to buy a Sunday roast, which is very classic French, because my daughters were here. And I walk in, and there was this basket of these little beautiful multicolored eggs, right? And the butcher, this is I was in my Burgundy home, and the butcher was so cute. He came in and he's like, "Oh, well, you see this one? It was like kind of a dark colored egg." He goes, this was laid by my chicken. Sorry, I'm translating in my head. My chicken is dark as coal. And this one over here would be a beautiful hen that has a beautiful red colored, feathers around her neck. And this big burly man was telling me these stories. And I thought, oh my God, this is why I love France so much. It was so incredibly sweet. And then he's like, "Oh, there was a blue egg here earlier, but the woman took it. So next time I come with my eggs, I promise you I'll put the blue egg aside for you." But that's sort of, you can get that. You can find that in Paris too, but you see it more when you're out in the countryside.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. I told you I'm going to be a good steward of time, so I'm going to keep on moving on here. So, okay, Sue Rice, what is the greatest thing, positive or negative, that has happened to you that's ruffled your feathers, and how did you respond to it?
The greatest thing or the worst thing?
Either one, positive or negative. So you can take this one either way. What's the biggest impact thing that's happened to you that's ruffled your feathers, and how did you respond to it?
I think probably sort of one of the most pivotal things that has happened to me was the breakdown of my marriage, which I know you and I've talked about, but I think that there was there was a whole lot of learning in that. There was a lot of disappointment, obviously. I think anytime something like that happens, there's a lot of sadness about it, but also a lot of, I felt much more empowered that I was able to actually build the boundaries around what had happened. One of my daughters recently said to me, "It's like you're so much more interesting now." Because I don't know, I can't explain it. I think the thing that we all are trying to avoid these horrible things happening to us. But and I know this is sort of a little bit, people, there are all kinds of quotes about this, but it really is true that those horrible things that you really don't want to have happen bring us a lot. They bring a lot of self-knowledge. They make us better people. They really do. If you choose for them to make you a better person. It's like I had my back against the wall, and it's really good once or twice in your life to have your back against the wall, because you know that if that ever happens again, you'll make it. Right? It gives you a spine that you wouldn't, because I think we're all kind of waiting for the thing to drop in life, like the bad things to happen. But you know what? Sometimes it's good when they do, because they reintroduce yourself to yourself. I mean, the most important relationship we have is with ourselves.
Yeah, that's I agree. And you're the most important person you know.
That's absolutely right. And sadly, a lot of us are too busy looking around the other relationships, but your own relationship, and that, to do that, sometimes you need to be alone. Like I could never have enough alone time. That would be impossible for me. And I'm never lonely.
Well, you have good company.
Yeah.
So it goes back to what you were
Thank
saying
you.
earlier. I mean, it's a famous line, but it's like, I really believe it's important to understand is, coming from the place of, is life happening for you or to you? And I
Yeah.
really think that is really a real game changer when you come from that perspective. Because if you see life as happening for you, even though the big, ugly, nasty things that happen to your life, you can look back and at the time they're never fun, but that gave you the most growth.
A lot of people talk about gratitude and gratitude exercises, but I write in the morning. I do my morning pages every morning. It's incredibly helpful, but I think it's important to be grateful for the bad stuff. When you don't get something, be grateful for it, because I think, and kind of, again, it's about following your intuition and having that trust and that confidence that the things you might not see it in front of you, but things will work out the way that they're supposed to work out. Right. And I think that that's a hard thing to do, but being grateful, even when you're disappointed, when something doesn't go your way, or, you might call it a failure or whatever, there's always another door just about to be opened.
Yeah, absolutely. When one door closes, another one opens. And I think that's something that you've sort of triggered in my mind, and talking about, confidence and talking about intuition, is that, when you have your intuition, at the time you have no proof.
Right.
And right. So, but you do gain it when you trust it, and then that thing happens, whatever, right? It comes to be, right? It's just never forget that, and right, and leverage that again, and see if it happens once, because again, in the moment, the proof isn't there. The proof's always after.
That's right. And I think that I believe that intuition's a muscle, right? That you use. And I've been helped greatly because I live in a country, this isn't my native language, right? I mean, I speak French, but it's not by any, so I'm always kind of, I have to use my intuition to understand people, right? Because so it's kind of like you develop a sixth sense. I also have a lot of animals, and I think when you're trying to communicate with something that doesn't talk, you develop your intuition. There's a way of, I think that, and I think it evolves over time, that where you become more and more confident that your intuition is speaking to you clearly, right? Like the radio waves aren't like slightly messed up. And I think that I know for sure for me that living in a country where people are French speaking has helped me develop that, because, and also virtual work. All my clients, there are a lot of clients I have that I've never even met in person, but you need to develop a sensitivity to their energy, what they're not saying, because don't forget that always the most important stuff is never said.
Right.
Or it's said at the end of a conversation. That's like my great rule. People always say the most important thing on their mind at the end of the conversation. Just so wait for it.
Right.
Wait for the bombshell.
All right. I'll have my pen handy for that one. Okay.
So whatever your last question is.
Oh boy, I already know what it is. Okay. This is going to be fun. So I guess, going back to that original question, that, obviously the breakdown of your marriage, but, obviously trusting your intuition, finding yourself again, gaining confidence, having your back up against the wall, right? You took all those things and leveraged them, and then helped move you forward. That's what I heard from that.
Well, I grew up in a culture, and I'm talking about the Atherton culture, the sort of, it was a privileged culture. The role models were, most of the women were at home. There was, whether it was conscious or unconscious, there was a programming about, really, to be whole, you had to be in a couple, or or you had to have your father looking after you. I can't explain it. There was always that, and there's nothing wrong with all of those things, but I think that becoming self-empowered as a woman has its particular challenges, is all I can say. And that when I lost that, that was a really important moment for me, to become truly empowered in my life, and in terms of how I express myself, in terms of how I deal with people. And I think it really, I think that, I think this is a tricky question, right? Because you don't want to be an island on your own, but you also, I think it's super, I see it too often, and I see it with people and women of all ages. This is not, 40 plus women. I see women, in their teens and their early 20s battling with this. So it's like, again, it's a paradox. I mean, the beauty of life is getting into those paradoxes, because you want to be open to, relationships, but you also need to be a whole person to enter into them. And that can be a tricky road sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that part of it too is, as you age and you find that independence and you find that confidence, you're bringing your whole self into the relationship, which to me creates a lot of value for the other person, because you're
absolutely. I think that, it's a pity that isn't, I feel like that isn't always valued. But and it's not about being angry, and it's not about assertive, it's about just coming whole.
Yes, exactly.
And vice versa for both the man and the woman, or the woman and whatever the couple is. It doesn't matter, whatever the combination is. I think it's super important that when people are partners, that both come as whole beings.
The sum is greater than
rather than looking to fill the holes in themselves through the relationship, I guess.
There you go. All right, so you kind of led into this a little bit, because I know you're talking about couples and teams and things. And so one of my questions is, like, Did you know that geese fly 71% further and faster when flying in the V formation? What do you think is the secret to getting people to fly? I mean, I say team, but you're obviously not on a big team of people. But even in your past experience, what do you think the secret is to getting people to fly in a V formation? Whether that's couples, a team.
Yeah, couples team. I mean, I have a small team with my company, but I think first and foremost, they need to be flying in the same direction. The
Hmm.
V isn't going to work if like three of the geese are going that way and three are going that. And so to fly in the same direction, they need to know where they're going. They need to have that, and it can have slightly. And I think that I honestly think that half the problem in life is a lack of clarity,
Mm.
right? And that when there is that clarity, a team will fall, an individual will be going in the right direction, and the team that they create will be going in the right direction. As long as everyone's on board with that same goal. And if they're not, they probably need to get into another V formation with someone else.
Yeah, which is also which is fine as well, because if they don't fit, if they don't fit into that formation, there may be another one that's better for them. And but again, but you're exactly right. Is when geese fly in that V formation, that when you see them, is they can all see where they're going, each one, right?
Right.
There's no blind faith. They don't
Exactly.
follow one another, right? And so you don't have 3 or 4 or 5 veering off, right? You have to know what I call, you have to know, where is our golden pond? Where is it we're trying to get to? And we all
Exactly.
have the same vision. So fantastic. So let's get into this here a little bit, Sue, because I do want to talk a little bit about your book and that kind of thing like that. So, and I have a feeling that this is where this is going to come in. So what are you doing, Sue Rice, to better the pond? What ripples are you creating, and how are you inspiring others to do the same? So, when from our conversation today, you really bring your authentic self. You follow your intuition. You're the master of word salad. You you have your magic carpet. Like
Word spaghetti.
your spice rack. There's nothing ever in a straight line. What are you doing to better the pond, Sue?
Well, interesting. I think it kind of, because I can make a segue to the formation and people knowing
Sure.
geese knowing where they're going, is that one of the things that I've seen working with, companies as big as Lego and Nike and as little as solopreneurs is that I feel like I feel like sometimes our visions are limited. All right. So the golden pond can be bigger, is basically what I'm trying to say. And I think that a lot of times success is measured by numbers of sales and all of that, which is of course part of it.
Mhm.
But I feel like the pond and the sales can be bigger if we enlarge, we widen our vision. And I've seen that particularly in the way people express themselves. So I've done a lot of work. I mean, my agency does a lot of email marketing for people, both lead gen and both outreaches and lead nurturing, right? So lead gen and lead nurturing. And and I've written probably thousands and thousands and thousands of emails personally. And as I did that, I realized that everything started to sound the same. It was always, buy this, buy that, do this, do that. And so this is when I started experimenting with, I'm like, maybe there's a better way of doing this now. And I know a lot of people talk about storytelling, but in the marketing world, the storytelling tends to be defined very narrowly as telling your brand story, right? And there's nothing wrong with telling your brand story, but it's a short runway. Like there's only so many times you can go to the dinner party and tell your story until they start not inviting you anymore.
Right.
So, and the same thing is true with sending out emails, or, there's only so many times, unless you're like Sarah Blakely and, people want to hear about how she started Spanx. But basically, people don't. So I started kind of experimenting with using little, they're not even stories. They don't have a beginning, middle, and end. They're like little anecdotes, little story snacks that would illustrate what a product or a service would do, a value that it represented, or a challenge that it helps people overcome, or a benefit, or a process. And that was sort of the birth of, and it worked really, really, really well. I mean, it got lots more sales, because basically what I was doing is wrapping up an idea, a naked idea of a product, into this wonderful, enticing, irresistible story snack. So that, I mean, just to give let me just give you an example. So I think we might have talked about this on an earlier call, but so you can say, I have a really great mentorship for you, and I can support you, right? That is what 99.9% of your emails selling mentorship, coaching services would say. Or you could tell the story that is it's a real story that happened sometime last year, where there was a guy in his torn jeans and flip-flops, popped on a little kind of private small plane to go from Bermuda to Miami airport. And he was there with one friend. There were like 2-3 people on the plane, and the pilot, and they were in the air, and he looked up ahead, looked at the pilot, and the pilot was slumped over at the wheel. Like, that's probably not a good sign. And he rushed up, he pushed the pilot aside, and he took the wheel of the plane, and he called air traffic control. I said, "We've got a problem here. I am flying the plane, and I've never flown a plane before." Sort of story of my life, but and so they got a guy that was like a teacher of pilots into the air traffic control, and they talked him in to landing into the Miami airport, and he was coming to land, and he fell off the radar. And everyone in the air traffic control, oh my God, the worst has happened here. And it was quiet, it was dark. They thought, he's gone. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 40 seconds. Okay, I'm on the ground. What do you want me to do now? So he was zooming along the runway, didn't know how to brake the bloody plane. And they told him how to, slow down the plane. And he hopped out of the plane with his ripped jeans and flip-flops. And that's a story about mentorship. That, you're not going to forget that message about mentorship, because that's, we are all, whether it's in our relationships, our business, our weight loss journey, whatever it is that we're trying to do, we're all flying a plane, and we don't know how to do it, right? And so why not tell a story that illustrates that? So that's there's so many. I mean, I have a story library literally of thousands that illustrate. It can be memes. It doesn't even have to be words. It can be, I saw on LinkedIn the other day a great picture of someone on a little tiny sort of Himalayan road that was really tiny, trying to turn around a 4-wheel drive, a huge truck, and like half the wheels were off the cliff. And it's like, and all it said was, "You too can turn around your life." And that, and that, who would not forget that? Who would ever forget that message? I mean, that image is, in my mind, and I will never forget that message. So there's just a million different ways. And, it's a much better way than, trying to sell your widget.
Absolutely. So going back,
wrap your widget up into something that's interesting.
Right. So going back into your book, Tiny Thunder.
Yeah.
Right, which is irresistible message for a overwhelmed world. And so obviously we know that it's very noisy out there, and it is probably rather overwhelmed. So tell us a little bit about that, because telling story, and you, when we talked earlier, you said the book is really kind of a metaphor about about teaching metaphor.
That's right. That's exactly what I mean. Tiny thunder is a metaphor about, making little tiny noises that people actually hear. Because, people think the most precious asset out there is money or crypto, depending on who you are. But actually the most precious asset out there's two of them. One is getting people's attention, which I think the tiny thunder really helps with that, because you're, instead of interrupting the conversation, instead of hitting people over the head with a hammer with your message, you're joining the collective conversation. It's kind of like a Trojan horse, right? You're coming in, and then you're not doing bait and switch. You're just saying, oh yeah, that reminds me of what I can do for you, right? Very gently inviting them in. So I think that attention is a really big thing, but even bigger than that, but you first have to get people's attention. But even bigger than that is the lack of trust. I mean, if you look at the statistics about trust, it's actually quite sobering. So, people, and the problem is it's kind of a cancer, because if you don't trust people in government, if you don't trust the press, which a lot of people don't anymore because it's kind of a, free for all, it's really easy. And when to start not trusting people you do business with, or even friends, or it's just, it kind of seeps into a lot of different things. So, and one of the ways of, creating trust is talking to people like they're human beings, not like they're a number in a funnel, which is what a lot of people are doing. We were talking about funnels, like I don't know. I don't like to think of me as like the sort of peg in a funnel that's going down. No one wants to be talked to like that. And that's actually not how we work anyway.
Right.
We're not linear. We're 360 degrees. We're not digital. We're analog. That's how human beings are wired, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It goes back, though, I was saying that from our like when we started the conversation today, and I said, it was funny because I was talking to my friend Gary Maxwell last night, and we were talking about it was a story enough anymore, because the fact is, when we went to the conversation, we were talking about how trust was eroding. So that's why some people were becoming cynical and questioning, and because they don't trust anymore, right? And I think that's where, getting back to basics of just telling really good story, right, will actually connect people, versus when you said earlier about being self-serving. So if that story is self-serving, then if we haven't built trust, then it goes nowhere. But if it's good story where it's engaging, or you're building into the conversation or building into the relationship, that's how we gain trust.
Yeah, you're gathering around the campfire.
Yeah.
But a lot of the stories and a lot of the way people teach storytelling, it's not about gathering around the campfire. It's about a different way of talking about yourself, which is the whole problem to begin with. Right? So the point isn't, I think the point is you talk about them. It's not even talking about you, but you talk about, it's not even talking about them. It's talking about their world and where they are at. And they are where, kind of tapping into all of that. And so the stories that you choose are going to differ. If the guy is a farmer in Idaho versus, I don't know, someone who, I don't know, I can't even think of, but someone who's a dog breeder in Switzerland, you're going to probably tell different stories to them. But what's interesting is you don't even have to tell stories that are about your industry or your product. You tell stories that are human based, that illustrate something, and then you make the link with your product. Right? If you can save time for someone, you can tell a story of saving time it could be related to anyone. I mean, one of my favorite time saving stories is the one about Steve Jobs. He and his wife, it took them 8 years to pick a couch. And and you could say, with us, you don't have to wait 8 years to make up your mind, but you can just, and you can have a bit of humor, just like you would talk to someone when they're sitting around the dinner table with you. That's exactly what we do as human beings. We tell fun stories about people we know, people we don't know, things that have happened, memes we've seen, there's just, it's infinite, where the runway for telling stories that illustrate things about your product is infinite. That's what's so great about it. And it doesn't feel like a template. It doesn't feel like, because half the communications out there, you could literally like throw in any product and it would all sound the same.
Mm-hmm. No,
and I don't, I'm not sure AI is going to help that, by the way.
So I think that then we should all read Tiny Thunder and learn of new and better ways of telling story. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. I'm glad you agree. All right. Being a good steward of time again here, Sue. What is one lesson that you have learned that you would share with an entrepreneur starting a business today?
So, to me, being an entrepreneur is, this is not to scare people, but it's really not for the faint-hearted, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for some people, I know some people who being close to an entrepreneur or supporting an entrepreneur might be a better place for them to be than to actually be an entrepreneur. But if you do decide to go in with, and do it, just be prepared for an unbelievable self-development journey. A fabulous, there is nothing that will help you understand yourself better than being an entrepreneur.
What's the biggest lesson that you've learned as being an entrepreneur, Sue?
What I've learned about myself, or just in general?
How about yourself? We'll make it personal.
So, I think the biggest lesson I've learned is that the power is in the paradox. And what I mean by that is that to get people to listen to you, sometimes you need to whisper. To get ultimate freedom, you need ultimate discipline, right? And ultimate focus. That it's not black and white, but it's the intersection of what seems like contradictory things, where the power and the beauty and the creativity lies. And I don't really know how to teach people that, but it's actually where you really succeed, is when you so I'm like military here. I'm really disciplined. I'm up really early, but it doesn't feel, it's like in the flow. I can't explain it. It feels like freedom. And I would never have understood that if I hadn't been an entrepreneur. Right? Is that and I know that a lot of people try to sell, sitting on the beach, but which is fine. Everyone, but everyone can do what they want to do. But I find that sometimes the most freedom is by following a certain routine that makes you feel incredibly fulfilled, and figuring out what that is. And for every single person, it's different. And I also think it has taught me such tolerance, because every single person comes into this world with a different set of gifts.
Absolutely. I would agree. And part of the journey is finding it. The second part of the journey is making a career out of it.
And I think people need to understand, you don't find it in a nanosecond, and you don't find it in a course. You find it by following your intuition about what feels good and what feels right. And like you said, sometimes you're kind of hanging out there, buck naked, like, I know this feels right, but I'm not sure why. But just keep going, and you will see the why. I think there was Steve Jobs had a quote about that, something like, just keep following your gut and you will get to where you need to go.
Mm-hmm.
And it might sound a little bit like kind of wishy-washy, but it actually isn't, because your intuition will tell you what's right. And if you're feeling bad about a situation, there's a reason. So
Right.
change it.
I always tell people, instincts don't lie.
Instincts do not lie. What is can I ask you a question? Am I allowed? How would you make a distinction between instincts and intuition? Are they the same thing?
The same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think, it's like, it's when you choose a house or a car or a partner, you either feel that it's right or you don't feel that it's right. And if it's not right, don't do it.
Right. There's your proof.
If you're hesitating, as my mother used to say, if you're hesitating, there's a reason.
That's right. There you go. All right. So I'm gonna be ready, because we're coming to the end here, Sue. This is the last question. And we said we're gonna be ready for the bomb.
Drum roll.
So, Sue, if you were standing on the top of a mountain and the whole world was intently listening to you, what would you say?
I would say, whatever it is that you do with your life, don't, how can I say this? Don't cede it to someone else. In the end, whatever it is that you want to do, whether you want to be, a billionaire, a mother of children, I don't care what it is, make sure that that you are the master of your own destiny, and that you're not being pulled along with what you're supposed to do or what people expected or sort of how you were programmed, and do whatever you can to be the master of your own destiny, because to me, that's the only way you can be free. And freedom is hard to come by in today's world.
Absolutely. And so, if I'm listening to you today, is follow your spice board.
Like, I know in 3rd grade, I already knew what I was going to do.
See, and you did it. You follow.
It's great. I just saw the spices on that board and I knew, and I still remember that spice board. Is that crazy?
It was talking to you. All right. So, Sue, I really want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for sharing your stories as a story you've never told before. So that's a first on the podcast. If anyone wants to find you, Sue Rice, where do they go?
So you can go to my site, which is suerice.com. And you can, if you want, you can just email me. I'm like pretty transparent. It's sue@suerice.com. If you want to chat, if you want to connect with me on places like LinkedIn or Facebook, I'd be delighted. If you want my book, you can either go to Amazon. It's on Amazon, all the different Amazons. And it's also, you can find it at suerice.com/Tiny Thunder. So those are all the places that you can reach me. And I love to meet new people, so I'd be delighted.
Well,
I have a lot of people strangers that I've met because they've read my book, and they're like on WhatsApp with me now.
So
I know you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to be aloof and everything, but that's not how I am.
So we can find you on social media. We can find you at suerice.com, correct?
Right.
And if you want to email you, sue@suerice.com. And find the book, Tiny Thunder.
Tiny Thunder.
Read the book, then talk to Sue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. There's the plug right there. All right, there you have it, folks. We had a great time here today with Sue Rice. This is Warren Barry, and I'm flocking off to take you beyond the pond to better the pond, because we're better together. Thank you so much, Sue.
My pleasure.